Now I really give floor to you. Right, go ahead, please. And we will have about 45 minutes for the talk, and then feel free to ask questions. And in case you have questions also during the talk, questions of clarification, just raise your hand or shout, and we will answer them.
So thank you very much. It's a big pleasure for me to be in this institute and to promote and support more interdisciplinary connections. I think it's better for me.
Yeah, it's better for you to stand. I don't know whether I can see you, but never mind. Go ahead.
So I think I will start with more broader context and more broader clarification of how I got more closer to the topic of ethnicity and things that are connected with it, even from the perspective of my original training or original field where I studied and for several decades, well, it's a decades already, my God, where I already worked. So I'm originally trained in human geography and demography. Usually demography in Western societies and Western universities is connected with sociology, but the Czech and Slovak experience or tradition, it interconnects it with with social and or human geography, although the human geography is very hard to translate because some people ask if there is a human geography, if there is an inhuman geography as well, which is very logical questions, yet very uncomfortable to explain. Never mind. And this is the geography. Most of you probably the first connection of geographies with maps. And especially if we put some social and cultural things and social cultural phenomena into maps, it provides very interesting and very broad overview of a situation that we want to talk about. Although it's very general.
Oh,
never mind. This is very interesting place, or this is just the overall picture of how ethnicity can be used, utilized in places or in times when ethnicity was a part of more intense political disputes. So this is how it can be presented in terms of the whole Hungarian Empire, and especially maps were used, for example, during the period of formation of countries that were succeeding or the successors of Hungarian Empire. It's interesting that the ethnicity was called ethnographical maps at that time. So ethnographical meant of ethnic identity, or the declaration, especially until the 1990s, it was the declaration, or the overall picture of ethnic composition was formed by the most common used language. So the most common ethnic marker was language. So mostly this is the map of a mother language or the used language, and it was from this data or from this surveys they somehow composed the overall ethnic picture.
The red are the Slovak.
Yes, the red Slovak, right? The middle are Hungarians, and all the nations. You can see the area of Banat, which is southern Hungarian Empire, that was like a small Europe, or Europe in a small, with dozens of ethnic groups there. What is also interesting in considering with geography is to see ethnic groups in the various social settings. Just an example how it was different distribution between urban areas in former Upper Hungarian part of empire. So the cities, these were mostly the cities or the towns that had some special privileges. So they were not towns in terms of today's perspective mostly, although the historical perspective, definitely they were, but in terms of populations, they could have only several thousands inhabitants. So, but still, these were the urban areas, and you can see that certain ethnic groups were more present in urban areas, certain were mostly rural areas. And also, this is 1930, published by Hungarian publishers, András Rónai. It was republished in 1993. This also was kind of a dispute over the boundaries that were set in 1920s in Central Europe, whether the boundaries were just or unjust. We see with the colors, you can see the places that were ethnically monoethnic or ethnically homogamous areas. So it meant like 90% population belongs to one ethnic group. You see that the whole eastern part of today's Poland, most of the parts of Slovakia, and especially Balkan areas were ethnically very heterogeneous. So this is a very interesting way how to show and portray in a very powerful tool as maps are. Just recently, well, it's not recently, it will be 10 years this year. We have published with colleagues the Ethnic Atlas of Slovakia. So lots of data, lots of years that we have compiled and we have gathered for publication. So the first census in 1880 until 2011. And it maps, it's very place-saving way how to publish ethnic data, because tables, charts, and all the rows that would take much more place than maps. What is very interesting also in terms of spatiality, I just come to today's time, it's the ethnicity in specific areas that can have some very interesting aftermaths. I'm not sure if some of you speak Hungarian. Yes, you know this proverb from Hungarian language is politically not very. So give a housing to a Slovak and he will expel you from your house.
Okay.
Or provide. Yes. I don't know the origin of this. And this was the title of this was the title of article published by some Hungarian journalists several years ago, and they were talking about the changes of ethnic structure and ethnic makeup in suburban areas of Bratislava that were originally mostly Hungarian, and since the suburban area of Bratislava currently goes far behind Hungarian boundaries, they've seen it like, okay, there are more Slovaks coming and the Hungarians are decreasing. So not just the areas of southeastern part in Slovakia, but also currently we see the community of Rajka in Hungary that is becoming less and less Hungarian and more Slovaks living. Maybe I think for many Hungarians, this proverb is very current and probably becomes very, very topical in terms of changing ethnic makeup. So this is how it can change. And now we can go to the second ethnicity. So I will start with some very brief overview of a media reflection, because this was the first time we had an experience with the Second Ethnicity Declaration in census. Although in Czechia, Hungary, they already had 2 censuses before this question included, not just like the Second Ethnicity Declaration, but for example, in Hungary, you could have used even more, or you could have choose even more ethnicities, not just based on your declaration, but also based on the language you use with your friends and families, the cultural traditions you adhere to, or any connections that can be filled out in a questionnaire of the specific census. But we see that it was some kind of a new topic in Slovakian context. It was several months and weeks before the census started. There were several articles saying that this is not a good way how to find out about our ethnic makeup, because some politicians thought that it would mean that it can open up faster assimilation, even though that the numbers of those who declared second ethnicity was only like 5 or 6%. I think the data are precious, but not many people expected that could be even more people who would declare it. But some of the Polish politicians said that only if 5 or 6% have declared this. So the data are useless or so, but I don't think it's true, because for specific ethnic groups, it provided a very interesting insight into the depth of how ethnic groups are on one side under the progressing assimilation, and on the other side showed that the continuum of the ethnic identity declaration, at least in terms of these big numbers. And now it's
and now a couple of slides that are not nice. So that will be me, because Juraj asked me to step into this paper to give there some theoretical background, because psychology is a discipline that deals a lot with dual identities and with how they are interconnected, how they combine, how they sometimes compete with each other. And also in psychology, there is much research showing how different patterns of identity impact on those people who bear them. So basically, when Henrietta, my former PhD student, was still here, she made a huge systematic review of the literature about multiple identities. And she mostly came across papers from sociology, logically, and from social psychology. But while mostly in the sociological literature, there is talk about intersectionality as a very complex phenomenon and its impact on how people perceive themselves and are perceived. And while the sociological literature provides a framework focusing rather on social structural processes, social psychology often emphasizes socio-cognitive concepts like social categorization, and under which circumstances we categorize like a Hungarian, under which like a Slovak, under which like both eventually, and how those identities interact. And of course, we know from social psychology research that social categorization can define intergroup relations in nuanced ways, because we can describe the individuals through various identities. Someone can be young, which might be sometimes an advantage, sometimes not. But when he's a young Roma, that's a different situation. And when they are a young Roma women, it even complicates things a lot for them potentially in their lives. And of course, we know also from social psychology that the salience of our identities depends very much on social context we are in which context in which intergroup comparison we found ourselves, because in some contexts, some identities are not meaningful to be used, while in others there are. And as Sadia would say, and we'll say in 1 month, also about our motivation, right, to express and endorse those identities in a given context. And of course, there is much literature in social psychology about the importance of dual identity. So what does it bring us that we feel as a Hungarian and Slovak at the same time, and not just as a Hungarian? So for instance, the common in-group identity model, which is the very cited model in social psychology, says that yes, a dual identity. So when we identify with both an ethnic category, for instance, Hungarian, and a broader national category, for instance, citizen of the Slovak Republic. So this dual identity can serve us as an effective strategy for minority group members, because it helps to maintain the ethnic identity while promoting inclusion within a dominant group. And the literature shows that dual identities are linked to better intergroup attitudes, as those shared characteristics between groups can foster understanding and acceptance. And also, as Barry says, there are also some multiculturalism benefits, because a secure ethnic identity, so if my ethnic identity isn't threatened by the dominant group, by the national category, so if I, as an ethnic Hungarian, doesn't feel threatened by being a Slovak as well, so it's very good because it contributes to a positive overall identity, leading to greater openness towards other ethnic groups, for instance. And what the literature shows as well, so this is really very small story. So there are different patterns of dual identification. And there is really contextual variation, because the salience and meaning of different identities can vary based on situational and contextual factors, such as intergroup contact, for instance. If I am in contact as a, let's say, Slovak Hungarian with a Slovak Roma, so maybe it makes my minority identity more salient, but maybe not. Maybe a common in-group identity becomes salient. So it really depends also on specific political contexts. And sometimes endorsing a specific ethnic identification or specific combination of ethnic identifications can also serve as a strategy for achieving a positive social identity. Because if my original identity is negatively connotated, if I endorse a dual identity with a positively connotated identity, such as national one, for instance, so it can improve my how I perceive myself. Basically, what has been identified in literature regarding dual identity are those like two, not opposite, but yeah, let's say opposite sides of a spectrum. One of them is called hybrid identity styles, and the other is called alternating identity styles. And basically, what the literature shows is that dual identity led to more positive evaluations of one's minority group, particularly when ethnic and national identities were merged. So in a way, hybrid identity is better for oneself and for how they perceive their minority group. But there is also another style where people switch between their identities depending on the situation, which is called alternating identity style. And they can, for example, switch between ethnic and national identification depending on circumstances. And this style was shown to be associated with more negative perceptions of both in-group and out-group members. So hybrid is more integrated in a way. And for instance, research on immigrants in Netherlands has shown that there are 4 latent identity profiles. It was done on a representative sample of immigrants in Netherlands regarding the dual identity patterns. So first one was exclusive ethnic identity. So this immigrant group member, I don't know, let's say a former person from Morocco, remains a Moroccan without endorsing Dutch identity. The second style is exclusive national identity. So they endorse the superordinate national identity and lose their original ethnic one. Then the third pattern is moderate dual identity. So they identify with both, but are not crazy about either of them. And the fourth latent profile was strong dual identity. So they strongly identify with both. And there was a significant variation of indicators of psychological adaptation, such as life satisfaction and depressive symptoms across these profiles. But the strong dual identity proved to be the best identity strategy regarding psychological adaptation and acculturation. Of course, there are challenging in measuring dual identity because at least in psychology, there is absolutely not a consensus about how we should measure those. And there is neither a definition nor an agreement on how to measure it. And one question that people ask themselves is whether we should measure and regard dual identity as the sum of high ethnic identity and high national or civic identity. So is it a sum? Or is it just an acknowledgement of two identities regardless of their relative importance? So I have these identities, but it doesn't matter how strong I feel about either of them. And an alternative approach to measurement is to directly examine the degree of identification with dual identity. So not asking about one and the other separately, but to say to what extent do you feel both at the same time? So there are different approaches in literature to measuring those dual identities. What do we know from psychology? The research focuses mainly on migrant acculturation in Western Europe. So it's very specific. It focuses a lot on intergroup relations and conflict, and also on well-being of those migrant groups. But what is completely missing from literature is the focus basically of this research and of this paper. And it is the focus on dual identities among autochthonous ethnic minorities in our countries, and also the focus on people living in Central and Eastern Europe, because most of the research comes from Western European multiculturalist societies, where also the basic ethnic makeup of societies and also the policies towards integration of minorities and also the number of migrants is completely different. But there is there is no research, not only a few research papers, but no research on people who are national minorities in their own countries, basically, on how they combine this national belonging with the ethnic one. And basically the census shows us a nice field to study these questions.
Yeah, this is the issue that I'd like to maybe mention also from the methodological point of view, that although the Czechia and Hungary have longer experience and tradition, there is very little written or discussed in their papers about this dual identity, especially, for example, in Czechia, Czech and Slovak identities. In Hungary, perhaps something that's rather closer, it's a situation of a Slovaks living in Hungary, who are one of the most assimilated ethnic minority in Hungary, due to the almost complete language exchange, as the language is still considered to be a marker of ethnic identity in this region. And most of the, if not majority and probably almost all who are in younger ages and declare themselves in Slovak are fluent in Hungarian and Slovak language. They only learn as a foreign language. So these ideas and these issues have been disputed in very specific ethnographic or minority issues related to Slovak minority in Hungary. But what is very interesting from the methodological point of view, it's the shift of a state statistics from previous, rather say, essentialist and primordial view of ethnicity as being something that cannot have, like many people even today would say, how come that a person have two ethnic identities? How it's possible? You should only belong to one, and then as all the theories of a previous ethnic identity theorists declare that ethnicity is only one, and people should the interaction between ethnic group was not that much in dispute, and especially with the influence of a former Soviet ethnographic influences, the ethnicity was defined as very strict, the boundaries were very, very visible, and not many scientists and sociologists, psychologists have even thought that the ethnicity can be fluid or even situational. So this, I think, from the methodological point of view, it's a good way how social scientists have entered into this process and somehow persuaded the Statistical Bureau of Slovakia that these questions could have been shifted to another level. Just very short information. The same thing happened with the question of religious affiliation. If you remember how it was different the previous years, there were two steps in this question. So at first time they asked you whether you belong or you declare themselves to be affiliated with any of the denominations, yes or no. If you said yes, then you could have chosen from the list of denominations and churches, while in previous censuses the non-religious category was listed among the name of the churches and denominations, which is a logical nonsense, because non-religious is not a religious denomination, apparently. So this is also very interesting how this statistical office shifted and moved forward, and then they have declared more openness toward the impulses from the scientific community. So for the first time we had a chance and experience to see the data from the census. Another aspect that it's very interesting for us as those who many times deal with the data, that from the census almost all data are available to process. Even they provide you the data at the level of an individual person. So you can also, they're of course anonymized, but you can work with them. They will not send you it by email, but you can process them in their premises. So the openness is also in this field. So as I've mentioned, only 5 or 6%, I don't know exactly how the exact proportion, declare themselves they have some second identity. Most of them, if you compare those who declared the second identity, there is not just one dominant, but it's more like a spectrum consisting of mostly Roma Ruthenian or even Slovak was declared for many of them as a second ethnic identity. The other it's really the spectrum of all ethnic groups you can ever imagine, and all of them have been part of the census.
And it's quite big, right? The other it's 21%.
Albanian, Armenian, anything, Serbian, and this is only the list of the most numerous that can be found in this era. But still, 21% out of this 5% proportion, it's not that big, but just the number of those. What is very interesting for many communities and many places, the second most common ethnic group that was declared was Czech, especially in the western part of the country, but not just only in the western part. But the prevalence of a second ethnic identity follows the patterns of the spatial distributions we usually see. So Ruthenians in the eastern part, Roma in central and eastern part, and Hungarian or Slovak in southern part. But also the other, especially in northern regions, could be either Polish or any other that is not listed here. But what is more interesting, it's how we can define and kind of describe more deeply what's the content of the data. So on one side we had individuals who declared only one identity, let's say monoethnic people. On the other hand, on the second part or the second category are those who declared one ethnic identity and had another. For example, I can show it on the example of Slovak. So 94% of those who declare themselves as Slovak were Slovak in terms of monoethnicity, so they had no any other ethnic identity declared. There is 5% of those we can consider Slovak were those who declared first identity other, the second identity Slovak. I think it's 5% is the other way, but 5% is the dominant, so they were the Slovaks with other identity, and the 1% were those who were other ethnic identity and declared Slovak as second. So we can have kind of a unknown, let's say, ethnic continuum. It's not a good proper word, but we can see at least what the statistics that encompass the whole society can reveal us. And for many, or at least two important ethnic groups in Slovakia are very interesting in these terms, because they open up that the majority of their individuals are those who are not monoethnic, but are those who declared their, such as Roma or Ruthenian identity as a second. Especially in terms of Roma, it's very interesting because it can bring us a more precise number. There is always a dispute among the people how many Roma we have in Slovakia, but this also can help us to see how far the Roma identity can go, especially in many communities, many regions where the numbers and the estimates can differ. And also with Ruthenians, probably needs more deeper immersion in how the Ruthenian identity operates in Eastern Slovakia. But also this is the case where it's very strongly interconnected with the Slovak. And in the middle, there is a small table or small data on what's the proportion of all of this from this total group, or the summation of all three types of identities, who's the percentage of those who are monoethnic. So for example, in Roma, 61% of those who are Roma are those who are monoethnically by their identity. Also, I looked at and in the article is more described more the proportion according to the settlement size. It can show us the relationship between whether they are more present in cities or in rural areas. But mostly what is interesting, we see the decline. Although we could have expected that in cities and more diverse areas, there would be higher proportion of those who declare second identity, but we see it's mostly in 500 and less. But I think it's due to the fact that many Ruthenian areas are very depopulating areas, very small areas. So this is the case. Also, what is very interesting relationship that the people who declared they have any second identity are there is a stronger relationship with the possibility of having a university degree. So it's kind of a self-reflection of their own roots, or probably self declaration or self kind of affiliation with maybe another ethnic identities they think they belong to. What we see, it's a table, it's a matrix. So the Slovak and Slovak means these are the monoethnic. But for example, in case of Hungarians, those who are mono-ethnic Hungarians, only 14% of them have university degrees. But for example, Hungarians with Slovak second are 90.4% have university degree, and so on. So this is a kind of an indication of relationship between university education. And this is just the last one, according to the age. Here we see the proportion of or comparison those who declared 4 ethnic identities and the age categories. Of course, the most commonly it's due to the size of the population. It's the middle age, so 15 to 64. But also, what is very interesting, that the young Roma have higher proportion of those who declare themselves as mono-ethnic Roma in comparison to the other ethnic groups, which also is very interesting. And just some spatial interpretation. So this is the distribution of the communes with the highest proportion of those who declared second ethnic identity. So southern Hungarian areas, and mostly Ruthenians, somehow fluidly coming into the areas of Roma communities in eastern and southern central Slovakia. And also we can also compare whether in these communes the majority of, for example, Roma and Ruthenians are of those who are declared as a first identity or as a second. It's not also easy to find any spatial patterns. We cannot say, for example, about Roma that in this area there are Romas who are mostly of a first identity or the first declaration, and here are the second declaration. But at least we see that there is some relationship with the size or the number of Romas in this community. So with a bigger concentration, there is a probably bigger possibility that the Romas will declare themselves as Roma with first ethnicity. The same I did with the Ruthenians. So only mostly in the boundary regions with Poland are those communities where the Ruthenians declare themselves as Ruthenians of a first identity. This is the last slide. I know the data from census are very, very general. They cannot say much about how the identity evolves. It can only just give hints or provides us some hints how it's distributed in the space. And it opened up many questions that it's not easy to answer. For example, the relationship with the age group. So this is probably, I think, from the perspective of the research in this area, I think this can be only as a beginning. So we need probably more individual research, individual specific areas or regions that needs to be researched to provide more complex and more coherent information how second identity operates in specific social economical conditions. That's it.